The Toy Box.
Young Etham loved visiting his grandmother, spending summers at her old house, playing hide-and-seek in the creaky rooms and listening to her endless stories were the highlights of his days. One afternoon, his grandmother handed him an old toy box. It was made of worn wood with intricate carvings that had faded over time. "This toy box was given to me when I was a child," she said with a smile. "But be careful, if you open it at night, the toys inside might come to life." Etham laughed at his grandmother's words, thinking it was just another one of her silly stories. Toys coming to life? That's just for little kids, he thought. That evening, Etham couldn't get the toy box out of his mind. It sat in the corner of his room, bathed in the faint glow of the moonlight that streamed through the window. He tried reading a book, playing with his other toys, and even listening to music. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the box. What if there was some truth to his grandmother's warning? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. As the night grew darker, the house became silent, with only the occasional creak from the old wooden floors. Etham glanced over at the toy box again, feeling a strange pull. He stood up and slowly approached it, his curiosity growing with each step. Finally, unable to resist any longer, he gently lifted the lid. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing a collection of old-fashioned toys. A wooden soldier with chipped paint, a ragged doll with button eyes, and a small stuffed bear that looked as though it had seen better days. Etham smiled and thought to himself, "Just old toys, nothing special." But then, as he started to close the lid, something strange happened. The wooden soldier's arm twitched. Etham froze. "Did I just imagine that?" he whispered under his breath. He leaned closer to the box, eyes wide, watching the toys closely. Suddenly, the doll's head slowly turned towards him, its button eyes gleaming in the faint moonlight that streamed through the window. Etham gasped and stumbled back. The toys, one by one, began to move, as if they had been waiting for him all along. Etham's heart raced as he watched the toys come to life. The wooden soldier stood up, its stiff legs moving with a creak, while the doll began to slowly sit upright. The stuffed bear rolled over onto its feet, its black beady eyes locked onto Etham. He backed away but couldn't take his eyes off the scene unfolding in front of him. Then, the wooden soldier spoke in a deep mechanical voice. "Come play with us, Etham." Etham shook his head, too frightened to respond. The toys started to climb out of the box, one after another, moving closer to him. The doll giggled, a high-pitched, eerie sound, and held out her hand. "We just want to play." Etham knew something was wrong. This wasn't a game. It was a trap. Etham's legs felt like jelly, but he forced himself to move. He turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as he pressed his back against the door, trying to catch his breath. From inside, he could hear the toys laughing, their voices growing louder and more sinister. "Come back, Etham," the doll's voice called out. "Don't you want to play with us?" He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping it was all just a bad dream. But when he opened them again, the laughter was still there, echoing through the walls. Etham knew he couldn't stay there. He had to do something. Gathering his courage, he bolted down the hallway, past the shadows dancing on the walls, and straight to his grandmother's room. "Grandma," he cried, shaking her awake. "The toys, they're alive." His grandmother opened her eyes slowly, a gentle smile on her face. "Oh, Etham," she said softly. "I told you, the toys come to life at night. But don't worry, they just want to play." Etham stared at her in disbelief. "But they're not normal. Something's wrong with them." His grandmother's smile faded slightly as she sat up. "Maybe you didn't follow the rules, dear." Etham's stomach churned as he stared at his grandmother. "Rules? What rules?" he asked, his voice shaky. His grandmother sighed and looked at him with a knowing gaze. "The toys are not dangerous, Etham, as long as you follow their rules. You must never open the box at night unless you're ready to play, and once you start, you can't stop until the game is over." Etham's eyes widened in terror. "What game?" A soft knock came from the bedroom door. Etham froze. The laughter of the toys seeped through the crack in the door, growing louder, more menacing. His grandmother stood up from her bed, walking slowly toward the door. "Grandma, no," Etham whispered, but she didn't stop. She reached for the door handle, her hand trembling slightly. As the door creaked open, the wooden soldier, the doll, and the stuffed bear stood in the hallway waiting. The doll smiled sweetly, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "It's time to play, Etham," she whispered, "and we never lose." Etham's heart pounded as he watched his grandmother stand silently at the door. The toys stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate. Etham knew he had no choice. The game had begun, and he had to find a way to end it. Fast. Suddenly, an idea flashed in his mind. Etham remembered something his grandmother had told him long ago. Every game has a way out. You just have to find it. With a deep breath, Etham called out, "I accept your game." The toys stopped in their tracks, their eyes fixed on him. The doll tilted her head, intrigued. "What game do you want to play?" she asked with a mischievous grin. Etham's mind raced. He needed to choose something he could win. Then it hit him. "Hide and seek," he said firmly. "But if I win, you go back into the box. Forever." The toys exchanged glances, their smiles fading. The wooden soldier stepped forward, his voice cold. "And if you lose?" Etham swallowed hard. "Then you can stay." A tense silence filled the room. The toys huddled together, whispering. Finally, the doll turned to Etham with a sharp smile. "Very well. You have until the count of 10. Hide, Etham. Hide well." As they began counting, Etham dashed out of the room, his mind spinning. He knew he had to find a hiding spot where the toys couldn't reach him. But where? He ran through the house, every corner seeming more dangerous than the last. Then he spotted it, the old attic ladder tucked behind a dusty bookshelf. Without thinking, he scrambled up, pulling the ladder behind him as quietly as he could. The attic was dark and silent, filled with shadows and old memories. He crouched behind a pile of boxes, his breath shallow, listening to the toys' footsteps below. "Ready or not," the doll's voice echoed through the house. "Here we come." The minutes felt like hours as Etham held his breath, the sound of tiny footsteps drawing nearer. But then, just as they reached the attic door, they stopped. The toys hesitated, unsure. And then, with a sudden whoosh, the toy box slammed shut downstairs. Etham waited, heart pounding, but the footsteps never came. The game was over.